I probably should introduce you to like everybody as far as like who you are. You're Rory Haglund to me. You're Rory Haglund Bluth to many people. But we worked together, what, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. A long time ago.
Almost 10.
10 years. We worked together at a company called CapShare, and Rory is a founding member of what I call the X Mansion that was mentioned in the pitch episode with my brother Tim, where it's kind of like a private LinkedIn, and it's just people that I think are amazing, and they are part of a Slack group that just brings me joy, right? I love being around cool people. I love being around like badass people. And Rory is both cool and badass. So she was kind enough to be one of the founding members of the X Mansion, which I guess that makes her an X-Man. So
there we go.
Yeah. So anyway, we wanted to get on this podcast, and Rory's actually hopefully going to be a regular feature on the podcast. I want to do a segment that I'm calling the atypical suspects, which is, a nod to the typical suspects. But Rory and I are both neuroatypical, as it were. I am bipolar, and Rory has her own stuff that she can talk about it as she feels comfortable. But I think that'll actually probably feature a little bit in this episode, where we talk about some coaching maybe that she has received, and also some of how that impacts the ability to make decision making for better or worse, right? So I've spoken a lot there, Rory. I would love for you to step in and share some of the feelings that you were talking about earlier.
I think that sort of background of how we know each other and a little bit of what our previous conversations have been about, and I think that's helpful baseline. I didn't know. Maybe you had told me about the atypicals. I like title. I really, really like that. That's cool. Trip and I were talking about a business idea that I've been working on, and I didn't remember the exact context, which I don't feel like is important, but maybe we'll end up sharing. It was marketing stuff. And the last thing he said to me on this phone call several days ago was something to the effect of, make your decisions based on data, not feelings. And then click. Like, that was the end of the conversation. And I spent the next 2 hours really angry because not at you,
a little bit at me.
That idea.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit at you, but mostly that is such a, I wouldn't even say neurotypical, but that's a very particular viewpoint of the world.
It's a very rational viewpoint of the world versus it's rational based or logical based versus emotional based. And in DBT, they would call that, your rational mind, your emotional mind, or your wise mind. And wise mind is the middle that you want to be in. So go ahead. Yeah.
And as I felt angry, really, it wasn't really directed at you. It was more, I guess I'm not sure where the anger was directed, but as someone who has historically spent their entire life only living in the logical mind, completely discounting my feelings, and ending up a miserable, sad sack of potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of the subtext is ignore your feelings. They don't matter.
Right.
Data is more important.
Right.
And that is the piece that I have only recently, in the last year, felt like I've made some progress towards unlearning that need to have data to validate my decisions.
Right.
Because
so one of the things here, just to square the circle before we get into the emotional aspect of this, is
yeah.
And we talked about this, in the green room, where really what I should have said, or what should be said in that case, is not, make decisions off of data, not your feelings. You should substitute, instead of your feelings, it is feelings about other people's feelings. Right. So when you're making decisions in marketing, or you're making like decisions about actions about others, what you try not to do is predict other people's feelings, because you can't know what other people are going to feel. So you have to use the best thing you can use is data to be able to, and you're not anticipating at that point, you're reacting to real data points, real feelings. So if people say they might be interested, but are they interested? If they're interested, they buy, right? If they say they're interested, it's because they're trying to make you feel better and they're making you go away, right? Like, yeah, that sounds great. Would you swipe a card? And they go, oh, no. Okay, then that's a data point, right? And data's not bad, right? But again, so I love DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. One of the things in DBT that they talk about is they say, don't predict the future, right? And try not to, anticipate somebody else's feelings. And the reason that that's important is because you're going to be wildly off one way or the other if you're trying to anticipate somebody else's actions, right? Now, your own feelings, you definitely 100% need to listen to, right? But it's your feelings about you, not your feelings about what someone else might do. And those are different. It's not, again, and be careful, it's not your feelings about how you feel about someone else. That's a valid feeling. But you're not predicting their actions. You just go, like, I don't trust that person based off of previous data points. That's a valid feeling, right?
Right.
Versus that person looks really sketchy. I don't know, like, maybe that's a valid feeling. But like, you should examine that, right? Like, do you have any data points to back that up? Maybe not, right? Like, are you just acting out of prejudice, or are you acting out of previous baggage, right? So like a great place where this will play out is, the guy that I'm talking to is really nice to me. He must be cheating on me, right? Because you got cheated on in the past. He didn't do anything to you. He probably is just like being nice. But because someone else had done something to you, not you, Rory, but one person, a person, right, had done something to a person, and that person had been nice to cover the fact that they were cheating, now you're applying, right? So when we're talking about facts versus feelings, or data versus feelings, or whatever, it is really, like, to your point, I'd never really thought about, like, oh, that's like a really important distinction to make. But these are different. Yeah. These are different gradients of both facts and feelings, right? Like, some things are hard facts, like, did they person swipe the card? Did they click the button? Right? Other things are just kind of like patterns, right? That are not exactly facts.
Yeah, and I think you're getting into assumptions and conclusions.
Yes.
With what you're saying about the feelings.
Right.
Which is there's a lot we could say about this topic in itself. I do want to establish that, like, feelings are data points.
Yes.
And
yes,
so
they are.
How I feel, you're right. And the history of why I feel this way about this person, the data point is that, in the past, something else happened to me. And now, like, that is why I'm reacting or feel a certain way in this situation.
And that can cut both ways.
For sure.
Right? Like, so, like, your trust can be abused because you had established trust with a father figure and this person reminds you of that father figure, right? Or that trust can be abused because this person reminds you of an authority figure of some kind. And that's often how that happens, right? Like, in cases of abuse with kids in, like, sports teams and things of that nature, right? Which is really sad. But just because, like, baggage has a negative connotation, but on the flip side, you can trust your trusting feelings too much as well, where, like, oh, I've done this before in business, so therefore it's going to work. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of what's happened to me with Noble Squad, right? Like, I had an opportunity to start an agency, and I'm like, oh, the last time I started an agency, I made a ton of money. It was super easy, right? But the world changed, and now it's all about AI. And I'm like, oh, shoot, like, right? Like, trusted that feeling a little bit too much. Didn't look before I left. And now I'm kind of hustling, right? Which is how you and I started, like, interacting again. So I'd love to hear more about, like, your thoughts on assumptions.
Yeah. I do have a lot of thoughts about assumptions and where that kind of leads, which there's different terms for it and people have feelings about the terms, but unconscious bias, essentially. And before we get there, I do think that would in itself be a very interesting episode and we can loop back. But where I wanted to make sure we focused on was the decision-making aspect of the process for individuals. So I can't speak for anybody else. I only know what's been true for me. And what's been true for me is that my feelings have historically been less important or non-existent in terms of my process for making decisions. And that's why when in this past year, I have done a lot of work to try to understand why that is and how to better balance my decisions so that I'm not just feeling what would happen was I would make decisions very hesitantly. I'm a very risk averse person. I would hesitantly make decisions, hem and haw over it for a long time because there could always be more data, and more data would certainly help validate the decision or point like to a different decision. And so it's a little bit like I was experiencing buyer's remorse every day, all day long. And I would be really unsure of my commitments. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Your question was about essentially assumptions, which leads a little bit into unconscious bias or other topics kind of like that. And before we go in that direction, which I think really could be its own episode, and I would love to
for sure.
Definitely explore that deeper. I wanted to really emphasize this point about decision making, like life decisions, and like what am I going to eat for breakfast in the morning decisions, and how the emphasis on using logic or data can kind of ruin a person. So I sometimes will not eat breakfast because I know, like I really need something high in protein, and but I don't have time. Maybe I do have time, but I don't feel like
don't have time
making
for eggs.
something.
Yeah.
I don't like eggs, but I know they're good for me. I feel bad, shameful that like I should just like eating eggs because it's better for me.
Right.
And I have some different cereal options, but really the better thing would be to have some like Greek yogurt and granola or whatever. There's always I'm always optimizing and never acting. I'm thinking 4 steps ahead, and that freezes the present. Like I'm unable to move forward. So then I just don't eat breakfast. And then, shocker, it's like noon and I'm tired and kind of cranky and other problems. And that's a very basic example. I'll use a more complicated example later, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how does that play? Because, like, I remember this summer when I came and visited in Chicago, and before that, when I was like, I think I called you or texted you, and I was like, Rory, you're one of the most amazing customer experience people that I've ever seen. And I've worked with a lot of CX people in a lot of different startups. You're easily, like, I usually don't say number 1, I usually say top 3. Like, you'd be on my Mount Rushmore of customer experience people, easily. Right? And you might be, in the Washington Jefferson position, right? Like, and that's a hard job. That's a really hard job. So it's interesting because I think part of the reason that you're so good at it is because you are optimizing all the time. And that's how you get good at that job, is like, don't waste steps, make sure people are happy, right? Right. So like it cuts both ways, and I'll use that phrase a lot. Like, the sword is sharp on both sides. Yeah. So like, how does that work where, you wake up, you can't eat a bowl of yogurt, right? But like you show up and fucking crush, dealing with cap tables at CapShare with like angry CFOs. Like, how does that work?
Yeah. It's the same way I think a lot of people struggle to do things for themselves that they can do for other people. I'm trying to think.
You think it's a forcing function? Like the fact that someone is demanding.
Also, it's there's the immediacy, like there's urgency to the situation, and I'm accountable to somebody else, and there's less room to sit and ruminate and explore all the options.
Right.
Because other people don't have patience for that, and like that doesn't make sense. But when it's your own life, you can.
Right. The higher value is to serve the person and not worry about the options.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And also, I think the getting into the headspace of this happens to me actually all the time, where someone will be sharing something like difficult for them, and my brain immediately like switches from thinking about myself to like
thinking about them. Their problem.
compassion focused, their problem,
Right.
like being really present in the moment for that person.
Right.
And saying all the things that I'm unable to say to myself because there is something psychologically different about other people. And again, your mileage may vary. I have no idea what it's like to be anybody else except for me.
Right. Yeah. 100%.
I get the feeling that it is different for a lot of other people, which is why I've spent so many years confused and miserable. Because I've been unable to vocalize, have words for what has been happening to me, for me, with me. Sure. And I haven't heard anybody else talking about this experience either. I think it boils down to having a very poorly or underdeveloped sense of self-trust and like identity. And so instead, since I don't have anything, like, I don't have a super strong sense of self.
You just externalized all of it.
I externalized everything. And so other people's needs come before my own.
Right.
And that is a coping mechanism.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, like, for me, I don't have the same experience, but in my DBT program right now, we just recently went through and did like a values analysis exercise. And it was like super easy for me to go through. And they were like, what are your parents' values? You know, what's a value of someone you look up to? And I was like, no. I'm not doing that. I know where my values came from. Like my values came from being a cadet at the academy, right? At West Point, right? So it's duty, honor, country, right? But I was like, wait a minute, is it duty, honor, country anymore? I'm like, no, it's actually more duty, honor, community, right? So like country is a little bit too Third Reichy for me on this one, right? Like, it's like, I don't have a duty to my country so much. I have a duty to the people in my world, right? And that can be across the border, right? Or it could be like in my same house, right? So like fellow libertarian, there's this guy, Dan Vasc, who's Brazilian, but he's a libertarian, right? You know, like he wears the Gadsden snake as a muscle tee, right? And he sings metal. Like he sings like cover songs he covers things like Amazing Grace, and he sings it in the style of metal. It's amazing. It's amazing. The best versions of some of these songs have come from him, right? Like he sings Star Spangled Banner, and it's just perfect. But this guy, he's a Brazilian, right? But he's very much a libertarian. And, you know, he would be part of my community, right? Like he's not part of my country, he's part of my community. And I think that is the point of that, was that like the value structure, I think, really does matter, right? So like for me, duty is my number one value. And I have a similar adjacent kind of like experience that you have, as far as like, I will sacrifice. I'm constantly putting myself out, right? Like, because it is my duty to serve. It's my duty to make sure that others are taken care of. And that's how my first manic episode was triggered, was that I'm at the first, you know, stepping in as an artillery XO, and I'm doing that live fire exercise, and I just don't sleep for the first 3 days because I'm doing my duty. I'm just constantly doing my duty, and I'm never taking care of myself, which is funny because, like, you know, it's the whole, it should have been, you know, put your mask on before you put anybody else's mask on. That's your duty, to stay in the fight. And I missed that part, right?
Same.
I didn't.
Yep.
You know, exactly. And for me, and maybe it is the same for you, but I don't know. But for me, when I'm in the fight, I'm in the fight, and then all of a sudden I'm down, right? Like when that happened the first time with the 101st, like I was tired, right? 72 hours of not sleeping, you're tired. But like, I didn't realize I was about to get fucked up, right? Like, I switched off. My brain just like went off, like the hard resets that have happened on this recording, like in the beginning, where it's just like window fault. And you're like, you're just gone, right? And then I came back online just as fast, and the medic was like, "Hey, sir, you okay?" And I was like, "I feel amazing," and I had no idea what just happened, but I seg faulted straight into mania, right? So it's a hard cliff, right? Where I think for a lot of people, what I've observed is they kind of push it and then they get tired and then like their body just kind of holds them back. Whereas mine just
Mm-hmm.
goes, hey, let's just keep fucking going. Here's more adrenaline and more enough, like whatever else cocktail is in there. So I don't know. Does that sound like anything that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think there's something about understanding your own limits, but also like the flags that go up before you hit
Mm-hmm.
empty in your fuel tank and being able to recognize those so that you don't burn out so frequently that perhaps I missed those lessons
Mm-hmm.
earlier on. And so instead, um, I would I would just go, go, go. And it still wasn't, I mean, it wasn't mania. Like there are other people who definitely were like, their baseline of healthy go is way, leagues above
Right.
mine.
Right.
But for
Right.
me, I was, waking up, going to work, going to classes, whatever it was,
Right.
and
Right.
doing my regular thing. And just the like overwhelmingness of it all, I would get stuck. What I experience when it's been too much and I've like run out of gas is
Mm-hmm.
a very numb, dissociative,
Mm-hmm.
frozen state where
Mm-hmm.
I can do the bare minimum. I can drive a car, I can have a conversation with somebody else, but I am doing that on total fumes and it's not healthy. And I
Right.
don't know how to rest when I'm in that state. I'm now anxious about being in this frozen state and
Right.
it's just spirals.
Yeah. Where it's almost kind of
I
like
just become a
it's
zombie.
like you've salted the fields. Like you're never going to get fertile fields because you're never going to be able to plant anything because the fields are salted and they're just going to continue to attrit their nutrients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of these times I would love to do just like a full metaphor. Like let's talk through like all the pick the best metaphors for
I love metaphors. I'm like fucking Yoda up in there. So, or I guess that's more Mr. Miyagi. I like that too. But yeah, I mean, like it sounds very similar to the bipolar experience, which is you hit mania, you go blaze through a bunch of your brain life and a bunch of your physical life, and then all of your energy, your emotional energy, is just like flash paper, and then you hit depression, right? So then you bounce down into depression, and then you're depressed because you're depressed, and then you get more depressed because you're more depressed. And then like nihilist depression leads to like the only happy thing is not being here anymore. Right? Like which gets really scary. And so like I have to be really careful about both sides of that, right? So, like I use an 11-point scale where like 0 to 10, where 5 is dead even. At 10 is like I'm talking to God, and 0 is I'm in absolute, nihilistic hell. And I like to live at a 5.5, and like it's not a 6 because like a 4 or a 6 is on the power curve, right? Because it goes like that, right? Like the further you are from center, the easier it is to slip in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to manage it because like if I get to a 4 and I recognize I'm at a 4, like I really, really, really have to pay attention, because like if you spend too much time there, like is it super dangerous to be at a 4? Probably not. But is it super dangerous if I get to a 3? Yeah. Right? Like one of the phrases that I use is I am without management, I'm 72 hours away from an absolute crisis. Like a nuclear level event in my life. And it's happened a couple of times, which sucks. But, like we talked about with Uncle Tim, in the pilot episode, I think that people like you and I are canaries in a coal mine, right? It's not that people don't experience burnout. It's not that people don't experience depression. They do. They just don't experience it at the level that we do, that people like us do, right? As fast as we do.
Yeah.
So like, what is it about our environment that is causing some of this? Like, is it the food, right? I've been advised that maybe a keto diet would make a lot of sense for me because it helps even out your mood without sugar spikes, right? I might try that. social media probably doesn't help. Screens in general probably don't help.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And this is where I feel like in the last year, I've been able to kind of make some connections and make some progress for the first time in a really, really, really long time. And for me, the key has really been being able to slow down enough to notice my feelings and view them as data or red flags. Like, oh man, I'm feeling really anxious about eating breakfast right now. Like, what's that about?
Mm-hmm.
Am I anxious about something else? Am I anxious about getting out the door because it's really hard to get a toddler dressed and out the door? And that's what's really going on? Or is there something I'd really like to eat right now that just doesn't feel like it's the right thing? And I feel shame about wanting something that I maybe shouldn't have, but would at least be some fuel is better than none.
Yes, some is better than none. I've heard a wise person say that on occasion.
That's my new mantra.
It's a great mantra.
Being able to identify, okay, I am having feelings right now. What are those feelings trying to tell me?
I'm having
what
feelings
can I
for
do?
myself.
Yeah. And what can I do about the environment that I'm in to help those feelings? Maybe they don't need to change. Maybe those feelings are the canary in my coal mine saying like, girl, you are already starting the day off tired and it's not going to be great. And you know that if you don't eat food, it's going to be worse. So don't forget to eat is what.
And
really
one of the things that we learn in DBT is that you should validate your feelings regardless of whether or not you act on those feelings, right? So like you should validate the fact that you're angry or tired or anxious or whatever it is. You should recognize and validate that feeling. But like you don't have to eat the donut, right? Like you could choose to have mini wheats, which I'm sure are much better than donut.
Somewhere on a scale.
I'm gonna have frosted flakes because it's not a donut.
Yeah. But and the thing for me was I was constantly living in this scale of like, you're right, a donut is maybe less good than the Frosted Flakes, which is less good than the other cereal, which is less good than the, Greek yogurt, whatever.
Right.
And this idea of good, better, best, and always looking
that is such a Mormonism. I was wondering when it was coming out. You're gonna play the card. Okay.
Just the idea. I think that's something that a lot of people.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
Regardless of your religious background, I think that's capital.
Yeah.
Like is your optimization. Like that's what you're doing. You're trying to find the best possible thing that you could be doing. And I remember learning about the idea of like Homo economicus. The economists like to believe that such a creature exists. The person who is making fully rational decisions 100% of the time. We're like, oh yeah, I'm that person. And those people are miserable people. And the rest of the world has, anyway.
Ignorance is
Everybody
bliss kind
has
of
their
thing.
own stuff. I don't know. Something like that. So where was I going with this?
So optimizing
cereal,
all the time,
breakfast,
good, better, best.
Optimizing all the time, good, better, best. What actually would have been better for me would be to eat the donut or the frosted mini wheats and enjoy the sensation of eating that. And get the small little pleasure of having something that I like that makes me just a little bit happy. And that would fuel my overall mental, emotional levels for a little bit longer till I could find something else.
But you have to be careful with that one too. Because if like all you're doing is just fueling yourself with little pleasures, that leads to, gluttony or hedonism, right? Yeah.
Again, other people. True for other people. For me, what happened instead was sometimes
too far.
I would eat the frosted mini wheats and I would feel shame because that wasn't the best thing to do. And instead of having any of the little pleasure from that experience, I only had shame.
Right. And that's
Which,
it's a weird balance because like I was raised Catholic and I have been Mormon. So I understand, the good, better, best reference and how that's taught and whatnot. And for a lot of people, and it's almost kind of like it's like building a bridge, right? If you were to use that as a metaphor, right? So you have an arch, you have uprights, you have a support infrastructure, and then you have the road on top. And if you have the arch, the support infrastructure, the uprights and whatnot, if you have all that in place, you can put the road on top. Good, better, best is kind of like the road, right? Or maybe it's this support infrastructure. But if you don't have the uprights and the arch, everything collapses, right? Because the more load you put onto it, eventually the whole bridge will come down. And I think that's true for a lot of these either religions or ancient traditions and whatnot, is that they're not adapted necessarily for someone whose bridge isn't fully intact. So like,
yes.
You see what I'm saying? Like, so like if the arch is a sense of self, right? Like a healthy sense of self, or the uprights are a sense of self-preservation, right? For me, right? Like I have no sense of self-preservation, right? Don't go check that hole. I'm like, I'm on it, Sergeant, right? Like I have no sense of self-preservation. But like, I think what winds up happening is then it's kind of like winching together a bridge, right? So like, okay, so Rory realizes that she doesn't have a sense of self, like center, right? So now you might not get that arch, but you have to, buttress the support structure with things that do the work of the arch. So does that make sense? Is that metaphor start like kind of holding any weight whatsoever?
Yeah. Metaphorical weight.
Metaphorical weight. So like if that's true, what are you doing to buttress, like to replace the arch in this metaphor, the sense of self? Like, is it mindfulness? Is it journaling? Like, how are you doing that, and how did you learn to do that?
Yeah. I have over the years hit points of desperation, never to the degree of like self-harm or suicidal ideation, knock on wood, but certainly like a very disheartened and like, I guess I would say depression. I don't experience long periods of depression, except for this like kind of freeze state, which I guess could be a term. I've heard the term.
It sounds a lot like burnout to me.
Yeah, dissociative depression or burnout, or there's lots of terms, I think, that kind of express that. And those eventually lead to depression holes.
Like proper depression.
And proper depression. Every time I hit one of those spots, I'm like, okay, I gotta climb back out of this hole. We're switching from bridges to holes. Sorry.
All right, let's go.
And I've tried like this new type of therapy, counseling therapy, like DBT, or somebody else, like, I don't know, Divine Feminine, or different actual medications. Like, well, let's try changing my medication. Birth control, not birth control. Maybe I have, and trying to like figure out the why. Like, well, maybe I have PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, I think, and where you get like your hormones really deeply affect you right before your period. And
sure,
that does tend to be like the days where I am the lowest of the low, which could be part of what's going on. But like all of these either solutions or explanations never really made much of a dent.
Right.
What happened to me this year was that I left the state of Utah and moved to Chicago, and being in a literal new environment. I had lived in Chicago previously. I grew up here, but I no longer had the same like social support that I did previously. So it's new things. I had lost my job and was trying to figure out like, what do I want? What do I need? And I really think the catalyst for me was working with a lovely person. Her name is Christina Corvos, and she's a ADHD job coach, among many other things. And that was the first decision I made. I guess I'll say second. That was the second decision I remember making in my life that was based on a feeling and like a hope. As opposed to I feel like this is what I should do, or I feel like the data says I should do this, or other people are telling me I should do XYZ, in terms of Anyway, maybe that's not true, but that's what it feels like, that this was a pretty significant step. Because I interviewed a lot of other job coaches to try to help me get out back into the job market. And with Christina, I felt different. And I just kind of enjoyed talking to her. And I decided to make that decision.
There was a data point in that feeling, though, that
Yes.
prompted that feeling. There was a clear data point.
There was a clear data point, which is that I felt good talking to her. And I didn't realize that was a data point.
No, there was another big data point that you wrote about when you wrote about Christina. Do you know what I'm talking about? She was different in the way she showed up to the call, where instead of like sales pitching you, she said,
yeah.
Right.
And
there
also
was like an action-based data point.
Yeah, that's true. So instead of everybody else that I met with was mostly like, here's my approach, and like I'm going to use these different, like, not personality tests, but like skills, aptitudes, blah blah blah. Yeah. To figure out like what would be a good career for you. And Christina just showed up and said like, well, what's something that you've been like avoiding doing that you'd really like to do, and how can we help you make progress on that? I don't even remember. I think I wrote an email. I don't remember who the email was to or what it was about necessarily. I'm sure it can go back and figure that out.
Nobody remembers the splinter. They just remember the pain of the splinter.
Yeah, exactly. And on that call with Christina, I did something. I made a step. And instead of letting the anxiety, the overwhelm of how am I going to know if this is the right step before I even take it, I just took the step. And you're right, that was the second data point, and that's why I ended up going with her. I have not been diagnosed with ADHD. In talking with Christina and like looking at some other resources, I identify with a lot of the traits and tools that work for people with ADHD. And I have thought about getting diagnosed, like officially. It's a long process, and I don't know that would change much for me. I'm not necessarily looking for medication. I think that for a lot of people, like the decision to get fully diagnosed is to attempt specific types of medication. And for me, it was more about, wait, I'm not crazy. Other people experience some of this stuff too. And there's things that they can do about it. And they don't feel fully ashamed of themselves every waking minute of the day. I didn't even think that was possible ever. So with Christina, and I have changed medication, and I'm trying to think some other like environmental factors. Talking with Trip, like having a routine where you and I talked almost every weekday for a while there.
For most people that would listen to this, they would know me as Paul, but yes, you call me Trip. And my friends call me Trip, which is great. My brother calls me Trip. But yeah, that's been super fun. I love talking to you. The concept of the body doubling, like just having another person that's just there that helps you stay motivated, stay accountable, right? We do need to be like, I do want to be, talking daily. And starting the first of the year, the third of the year, whatever, I am hoping that we can kick off the Foundry, which will be a lot of fun, and just have that place for both of us to be building our businesses. I know how's that actually played into this kind of like road to recovery? Like, what is that all about?
Yeah. I think realizing like structure actually really is important for me, and having more emotional stability. And so being able to talk with you on a regular cadence, having co-working sessions with Christina where it's just body doubling. We start and say like what our intention is for that hour, and then we check in at the end, and like that's
super powerful.
Super powerful. I noticed that one of the things that also helped me get out of the funk was having like heart-to-heart conversations with really good friends. So whether that was like meeting somebody for lunch or occasional phone calls, those are things, the relationships are also part of my emotional health.
I think that's true for a lot of people.
I think that's true for a lot of people. And because I want more good things in my life, like having more contact with people that I love, is good, and more is better than sometimes.
Yes.
So I had this idea of, okay, well, as nice as it is to get together for lunch with somebody, it's even nicer to have like a 2 or 3 day or 5 day trip with them, where you can really like unwind and have multiple opportunities for a heart to heart or just connect. Yeah, connection. It just doesn't even have to be about like deep, dark things. Sometimes it's just, fangirling about the same artist or whatever it is, but just having, more moments of connection. I noticed that's something I want more in my life. I was part of, I don't remember. Well, the last time I went on a girls' trip, I was part of a group text thread, and I just remember the chaos of that particular group text. And I had an idea of how to use AI and some just general automation to make that the planning process easier. And I thought, you know what, maybe other people are either tired of being the planner in their group and like
the hub,
are burnt out of being that one person that everybody relies on to like just take care of it and make the trip happen. Or there might be people out there who have never taken one of these trips because there is no friend in that group who is willing to like deal with the headache.
Right.
And not even just deal with the headache. Like some of us get really easily overwhelmed by the sheer number of decision fatigue in trying to plan a trip with multiple people.
I think the hard part for me would be like just like budgeting it. Like I can do the hub, I can make decisions, but it's like, how much is this going to cost me? Right? Like if I just knew, like, okay, this is, it's going to cost everybody $800, right? Or we're going to keep it to $800. I could do that, right? But just the open-ended, like, I have no fucking clue. So, no,
exactly.
I'm just not going to do that.
Not going to do it. Which also I thought was so ingenious. As of this day, I have no clients. I don't know what will happen with this business idea. But the original idea was I, as a neutral third party, come in and I send out a variety, like a couple different surveys, some of which are responded to ahead of like a kickoff planning call with everybody, some of which we then like answer the surveys live and are talking about making decisions in a group. One of those questions is, what is your budget for this trip? And what is your maximum budget for this trip? Then if you can say, okay, here's how big the pot is with everybody's. People don't feel comfortable necessarily sharing financial information. And so being able to see, okay, as a group, here's how much everybody could have. What could we do with that amount of money? Maybe it's just a road trip. Maybe 2 guys drive up and somebody else drives down and we meet in the middle. Or maybe we didn't realize how well some of our friends were doing and we're all going to somewhere really cool this year.
Cabo or something like that. Yeah.
Cabo. I don't know. And also the idea of are people comfortable splitting the cost unevenly?
Right.
Because they might not be, in which case you are dependent on
limited by your lower bound.
Exactly. So,
but that's a cool idea. I mean, that's actually how we kicked off the conversation today, which was we were talking about market. Like you finally got a squeeze page up, which is awesome. I was so proud of you in how like you just pulled the trigger. You set a date, you got it done. Great job. And then you got an Instagram ad up and it's running, but it's not converting yet. And I was like, make decisions based off of data, not feelings. And I sent you for a loop. Like I didn't even intend to. And now here we are like an hour later talking about this. So I mean, I think it's good though, because like, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and we won't cover it today, but we'll cover it in the next episode of the Atypical Suspects, is that the OODA loop model for decision making, which is where we get the agile methodology from. So, small, tight decisions like constantly are better than big, heavy ones over time. So the more decisions you can make, the faster that predicts success. So it's an interesting balance, right? You have to be able to not waste as I like to say, you have to not give away too many of your fucks, right? You have to be able to give a fuck, and if you have no fucks to give, then you're out of the game, right? And so you have to protect them. You have to protect your gaffes, right? And it's just like any other game. It's any other game. It's just resource management. So if you spend all your resources too early, then you won't get and you don't do it wisely, you won't get more resources in the end. That's kind of what we talked about, was like playing Catan, right? Like if you're not playing Catan well, you're going to get your ass kicked. It doesn't matter how, like, where your numbers fall, right? It's how you manage your resources to get more resources. So how you manage your gaffes early on is how you are going to get more gaffes in the end, right? So, it's important to protect your give a fucks. But, I don't know. I feel like we're at a pretty good spot. Is there anything that is just gnawing at you that you want to cover or put a pin on for next time?
Not that I can think of. I'm sure I will come up with things as soon as we say goodbye. But
yeah, we'll put it on the board and it'll be there for next time. So, we're figuring this out. We'll get all the technical stuff ironed out. That's one of the things that I try to take joy in the iteration, right? So, like, I try to look at it like it's a constant opening Christmas presents, right? So, like, it's lots of little Christmas presents. So, like, every single time I do the podcast, it's like, oh, well, I figured out how to put my pop filter on a different boom, and now, like, I'm not fucking with my pop filter. Like, last episode, I was fucking with it constantly, and it's like, well, I figured out the lighting, and and my key light is actually set, right? So, like, like, and every time it's like, oh, look at what I figured out. Like, look at what I figured out. And even if it's only just to me, right? I love that experience, and I think that that's helpful. Because one of the things that I was worried about when we were getting all set up, and I was like, man, I hope Rory doesn't find this to be too frustrating. And she's like, fuck it, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? Like, find joy in the overcome, find joy in the iteration.
Yeah. I guess I will say one last thing. During the summer, there was some, or maybe it was early fall, there was something that prompted me. I honestly don't remember what it was, but the apartment that we live in, we've rearranged, like, it's kind of a wide open main area. We've, like, rearranged, okay, where's the kitchen table go? Where do the couches go? So many times since we moved in January. So many times. And I haven't really liked any of the layouts at all. They've always ended up feeling really chaotic to me. And I finally tried something new that worked really, really well. And I could tell, I know it's not, it's duh. Like, the places that you spend a lot of time in, if something is off, like, it does affect your mood. And if it's not and being able to finally find a layout that felt good to me, the fact that I made the change at all, action, felt really good. And that I finally was able to, like, enjoy. I come out and I see this room and I really like it. And it makes me happy. And that's something that I've also done with Christina. I think she calls, like, space beautification sessions or something, where people take some time. And sometimes just going through, like, it doesn't have to be the whole room. Even just, like, that box that's annoying me, that's right here, that I need to go put in recycling, or, magic of tidying up. It's a real thing, especially for people with
Marie Kondo
overactive, like, sensory input, where I do notice all the things, and the accumulation of, okay, one final thing, and then we can wrap it up. But I was doing a jigsaw puzzle yesterday. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle. We're getting towards the end. There's now a section that is, like, fully enclosed by the border, and we had a bunch of pieces, just loose pieces, in the middle. And there was space to, like, move things around and connect things, but there were so many pieces. And I would pick up a piece and try to figure out where it goes. And the chaos of too much prevented me from finding connections. And it was just, like, not emotionally, but, like, brain overwhelmed.
Sensory overwhelmed, yeah.
Sensory overwhelm. So I decided I would push some of the pieces, like, out of the puzzle area, which meant some of the pieces that I had found the perfect spot for, like I know this is where it goes, but it wasn't attached to anything, I was losing those. So like the sunk cost of, but I already worked so hard to figure out where does this piece go, but moving them all away, so the only things that were left were things that were connected, I connected like 10 puzzle pieces as soon as I did that, because I cleared my plate.
Cleared the
so
board.
many different metaphors.
Cleared the board.
Cleared the board.
Cleared the board. Yeah, I mean, like, and that's very much a thing. I also had a business coach back in the day. His name was Andy Drish. I would love to reconnect with him someday. But one of the things that he talked a lot about was being out, like getting out of scarcity mindset, like getting out of the idea that like, I'm never going to find it again. I'm never going to find that puzzle piece, right? Like I worked so hard. And it's like, what are the things that you worked hard for that are holding you back now? Right? Like, because you can't let go. Right? And we talked about this to wrap this up with a nice little bow. When I did that values exercise, I, went through my parents' values, and I recognized that like my parents had created value structures to optimize their lives based on either things that they had enjoyed in childhood or things that they really did not enjoy in childhood and didn't want to pass on to us. But once they had achieved, like meeting those values, I don't think they ever went back and reevaluated, like where I swapped out country for community, right? Like I never, like, it's important to reevaluate, because like, not only should I have 3 values, but I should add a 4th, right? So duty, honor, country, or duty, honor, community, and wisdom. And wisdom actually probably should be the number 1. So it should be wisdom, duty, honor, community for me. Like that should be my hierarchy of values, or my Mount Rushmore of values, with wisdom in the George Washington spot, right? But if you don't go back and reevaluate, what are the things that you worked hard for, that you acquired, that are now limiting you, that are now preventing you from connecting more puzzle pieces? And I think that's a really interesting kind of like exercise to think like, it's almost kind of like good, better, best, but it's not. It's because it's not best, is evolution. Like, have you evolved, or are you stagnant? So are you continuing to evolve, or are you stagnant? I don't know. It's an interesting topic. I would love to talk to you more about it, Rory. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love talking to you just in general. Like, I think you're one of the most fascinating, most thoughtful people that I get a chance to interact with. I am a huge Rory Haglund fan. But I try to tell you that on as many times as I can, because I try to express my gratitude to all the people in my life. But it's really important to me that the people that are, I want to say, that are special to others, but not necessarily special to themselves, hear it. Because I know that means something.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it, because I'm the same way. So I really appreciate you, Rory, and I look forward to the next time that we get to have a conversation.
Same here. Thanks so much.
All right.